The module what I will describe today or I will discuss with you today is basically the fundamentals of artificial neural network. As we know, artificial neural network, or commonly known as ANN, is predominantly used in a lot of machine learning applications in the present days, as well as it is existing for some time. So what I will introduce in this course is the basics of the artificial neural network, what are the basic composition of this artificial neural network, and how it is derived from the existing biological neuron model which is existing in our nervous system, and how our artificial neural network resembles that particular model. Obviously, when we think about the computation, we have to know about the computational blocks incorporated in this particular ANN network, and that we will learn that what are the ways the data gets processed and data gets communicated to the various sections of this particular ANN network. We will also know that how these ANN networks can be trained, what are the different existing models for training this particular ANN networks, and how they can be usefully work on the data for the specific for the problem. Then we will move on to a small case study where we will show that how this can be very useful in a very common applications like disease prediction. Obviously, we will also give a brief description of the type of the functions which are called activation functions in this particular neural network model. What are the options we can have so that we can actually have a good knowledge or the functional model of this activation functions for our use in the neural network activation model. We will try to conclude with the various applications one can target with this neural network models, and which are existing in the literatures and in the common software applications based on machine learning. The applications, we will just have a very quick go through of these applications, and lastly we will conclude with a snapshot of some of the comparisons or the where the neural network is different. What are the issues by which artificial neural network can be considered as different from the commonly existing machine learning algorithms. And that is our conclusion, and we hope that this course will be very interesting for all of you. So today's topic is an introduction to artificial neural networks, commonly known as ANN. We will try to discuss give the definitions of the neural networks and the fundamental components of it. We will also have something on biological neurons, and then we will move on to the architecture of the ANN, the applications, and the comparisons of ANN with the conventional AI methods. The artificial neural network was being defined by Tsoukalos and Uhrig in 1997, which states that it is a type of data processing system where we have largely highly interconnected components, or called artificial neurons, and that data processing churns out an useful result which can be very well compared to the cerebral cortex functions what we do in our brains, in our human or biological objects. So in a very interesting way, we can view this particular ANN as something, as a relationship between a cause and an effect. So we drive the system with the data which may be sort of value, and then we use that to identify a particular pattern which is existing in the data. For example, the patterns the patterns for this example, we have identified the different, that among the different types of animals, we have identified the frog, and obviously there is some sort of abstraction of the frog parameters going which are abstracted by our nervous systems, and based on that abstraction, and then there are classification based on the abstraction which is identified correctly that this is a frog. And we are trying to develop the same model of abstraction and processing and coming to a conclusion based on our artificial neural networks in our computation problems. Fundamentally, we can define a neural network as information processing which actually is inspired from the biological nervous systems, maybe our brain or central nervous system. And obviously, it's also a structure, it's also a composition of a number of interconnected processing elements which are commonly known as neurons, and they are learned, or they get experienced through some training process by which they can work very accurately and efficiently. So, little going back to the biological stuff what we have in our central nervous system, we all know that it is a particular connected network, and each component of a network can be classified as a central component, which is the neural cell, and then there are some connectivities called dendrites, and which connects with the other cells, and there is something going on to the axon which takes the data from the nucleus to the next level of the network. So similarly, we can actually, the way we try to classify the components in a biological neuron, like the dendrites which gives the connectivity, the soma or the cell which actually defines a function, and the axon which actually takes the output and tries to connect with the next layer or next level of the cells. So the same model, so we can tell that there is some sort of firing in the axon, which means that if there is some sort of the data which comes to the cell, to the various dendrites from the other parts of the network, gets processed or gets understood or gets abstracted by this particular cell, then the next level of information, which is called a firing, is passed on to the axon to the next level of the network. So as we have understood the biological network, which is the neural network, the same that we adapt that particular methodology in our artificial neurons or artificial neural network, which is also nothing but information processing systems adapted from the biological network, and it also receives signals as we see in the biological networks. These signals some way converge to the cell, to the neuron cell, but before convergence, they actually are modified by a factor which is called a weight factor, which comes from the synapses, and then the signal values are summed with their weights and comes to the central point of the neuron, which is the neuron cell, and then neuron cell actually generates an output with that particular data, and that output may be based on an activation function which we try to design according to our modeling of the problem, or according to the way we want to try the solution at the output, and that information flow is being done in a particular artificial neural network. So we can see a very basic example in the figure in the left. Actually defines the biological network, where we see that a dendrite, the neural cell, which is identified by its soma and the axon. So the signal generated will be activated at the soma and will be transmitted to the axon to the next synapse, which brings the signal to again the next soma of the next neuron. So there is a propagation of the signal with certain activations at each neuron cells, and the way it gets propagated to define a particular action. Similarly, we can tell the dendrites, which are the inputs to the cell in a biological neuron, are nothing but the input channels which we have in the artificial neural network. And then the cell actually does a sort of weighted summation of these inputs, which is shown in the right side of this right side figure, where we see a summation of these inputs with the weights. And then there is an activation function which we see in the right half of the cell. There is a threshold activation function. We can choose different activation functions, which will go in the subsequent slides. We will see that. But this particular activation function is a threshold, which means that the axon gets the data if the summation is over a particular value, and it doesn't get any trigger or any data if the summation is lower than some threshold value. So this is a very basic model of a neuron cell, and the way the data gets into the neuron. And this model can be modified in various ways. That means in terms of the function, the summation function we do at the cell, as well as the way we do the activation function in the cell. And this can be modified in the different variants of the basic neural networks. So again, we discussed something very fundamental. What we told just in the previous slide, we discussed in the previous slide. It is just elaborated in a very simple way here. So what we have here the input units, which are the x1, x2, x3 are the input data, and there we have the weights. Okay, how do we generate these weights? Obviously, we will discuss. We can find in the next discussion how we will generate these weights. But let us take that we can generate these weights, and these weighted inputs gets into the soma layer, which is actually a summing function with a bias. That means it is something like we sum, but there is already an offset in this particular summation, which is called a bias, and then we operate an activation function on this entire value, which is represented as the computation in the soma, or the activation function f mu, which actually generates the data for the next level, or the output y. So as we have already understood, or we have seen, that a particular neural net consists of neuron units, cells or nodes, which does the summation and activation, and obviously there are associated weights by which the inputs gets converged to these particular cells, and this weight actually represents the information which we need to handle, or these weights which we need to tweak based on the problem definition, based on the existing data or the training model of this particular neural network. So the activation of the activity level is a very important aspect of this artificial neural network, because we have to know that this actually defines that how the way we are proceeding towards the solution, because it might not be always a very simple neural network architecture where we have only two levels, one input and one output level. We can have a very complicated structure where we have the activation happening at the various hidden layers of this neural network, and so it's very important to how we define this activation function for a given computational problem using neural solving solution of a given computation problem using neural network. And obviously we have to also understand that the output of a neuron is are single at a time, which means that a particular neuron will generate a single decision or a single value at one point of time, though we can club the decisions on the values of a multiple neuron, and we can use them as an input of a particular neuron. We will show the variance of this particular neural network, and I think the things will be very clear to us. So this is a very simple example where we try to define the very basic or basic activation function, which is a threshold function, and the combination of the weights. So right hand figure actually tells that how the summation functions can look like, where we have the summation function generates the value x1 w1 plus x2 w2, where x1 x2 are the input to the network and w1 w2 are the respective weights, and then the activation function is a sort of threshold function which actually is defined in such a way that if the particular summation or yn is greater than a threshold value theta, then the function will evaluate to 1, and if it is not, or if it is less than theta, then the function will evaluate to 0. So this is just like a spike function or a threshold function which we can use as an activation function, and this works very well. That means in a simple problem like binary classification, where we either classify it as a true or we classify it as a false. So now we go into a little bit on the architecture and the strategy and the types of activation functions for this neural network. So the architecture of the neural network can be single layer feed forward, where we have only one input layer and one output layer, which is a very minimum architecture for a neural network, and we can associate the weights for each from each of this input layer, the way it combines in the output layer. And this is a very simple way or simplistic model of the neural network. The more common model, or the more or the complicated model, or different levels of complexities arises in the neural network once we have the multi-layer neural network. So in the multi-layer neural network, what we have the activation or the hidden layers, which are represented as Z1, Z2, and Z3. The neurons in the hidden layer, represented as Z1, Z2, and Zn, takes the data from the multiple inputs in the input layer, input nodes from the input layer, and these input nodes gets combined with different weights to each of these hidden layer nodes, and each of the hidden layer nodes will have a summation and will have an activation function, and from where it will converge to the output layer. So this particular network requires lot of ways to get determined, because there are a lot of and as we go on increasing this particular network, we will have more and more additional hidden layer, and so we can imagine that how many weights or how many levels we have to compute in this particular network to come to the ultimate decision layer, which is the output layer. The another variant of this neural network, that apart from this feed-forward type, is actually backpropagation type. And this backpropagation network are also called recurrent neural network. This model, the figure which is presented here, is very simple, but normally we can appreciate it by using a sort of memory where we can feed the decision created by one layer back into the neural network model, so that the decision which has been generated can be incorporated into the next level of decision, or rather we can decompose this particular network in the different, unroll this network as a proceeding with time, where we take the decision created in the previous interval of time to decide or predict more accurately in the next interval of time. So now, as we look into this neural network model, we obviously appreciate that we have to have a learning algorithm which will try to develop this network in terms of the weights which are associated in the network, and as well as that means how we can minimize the errors which can be associated in the decision making process, or in the processing of the neural network, or the process data of the neural network. So to do this, we can adopt the strategies like supervised learning. So when we tell that we are supervised learning, we try to have a data which is already labeled, which means that we use a set of input data for which the output is already known to us, and so we try to train the network so that the output generated by the network and the output which is known to us for this data is minimized in each of the iteration process, and by that way we reduce the error, or rather we try to assign the weights appropriately for this neural network. But remember, if we are doing the supervised learning, we need to have a data for which we know the desired output, or in the way we have a perfectly labeled data. For the unsupervised learning, we don't have the labeling, but we try to have a sort of clustering task, where we try to differentiate the outcome for the different inputs, and try to cluster the outputs based on the different inputs, and try to group this as clusters, and try to take this particular as a learning of the network, so that it is sufficient to differentiate the input values, whether it comes under a cluster 1 or cluster 2 or cluster n. And this is the way the neural network can learn and can be used for a domain where we don't have the labeled output. Another technique by which we can make this neural network learned is actually called reinforcement learning, which tells that there is a sort of accuracy, or sort of performance criteria which we have to achieve in this particular network, and unless this is achieved, we will go on iterating on the networks, and we will go on fine-tuning our network, so that ultimately at a point we reach in the iteration our network is perfectly trained based on the performance parameters, or based on the quality parameters, or based on the guideline which has been given to make this network apt for my particular problem. So in a nutshell, reinforcement learning means we actually restrict our network with some particular measures, and we try to do the iteration of the network on these measures, and try to bring the network to the very best configuration. Now the activation functions which we have seen, what we do in a node, can have varied types. They are just listed in this particular presentation. We can have a very simple like identity which maps the same value to its output. We can have a binary step which we have already seen in one of the examples. We can have a sigmoid function which is a little bit having some sort of slope, and we can have a complex like a hyperbolic tangent, and these functions we can use based on our given problem and based on some of the knowledge what we can perceive the problems, and we can also do a sort of trial and error to fix this particular activation functions for the nodes. Now I will give some of the very well-known problem domains where artificial neural networks can be used. Obviously, we can have the patterns, we can have classification of patterns, we can have the selection of patterns and storing of patterns using neural network, because neural network is very good in classification. Okay, it can give generate the levels and the output for the unknown data. Similarly, it can be used also as a mapping function, because the labeling can also be considered as a mapping function where the inputs are mapped to the class or inputs are mapped to the labels, known labels, which are the classes, and that's also a common problem which is solved by neural network. Similarly, it can, as it minimizes the error, as the neural network has a very good way of minimizing the error, it can be very well used in the optimization problems and finding the solutions of the optimization problems. And obviously, neural network is a sort of exploratory approach for the problems where we don't have a definite algorithm which we can use our data to correct our model and hence generate a learning experience and build the model which can properly classify or predict the data. So we have a lot of applications presently which are running using the ANN. That is obviously a lot of the classifications for disease diagnostics are being considered in the domain of neural network. We can do a lot of this information retrieval, pattern retrieval, pattern matching, pattern searching using the neural network models. In the business and management, we can actually find a lot of these customer patterns, customer predictions based on the data available with their transactions, and that is very well used. In education, we can use a lot of models in the learning ontology, or we can develop the learning methodology of the individuals based on their learning patterns, and we can find out the learning patterns of the individual and can enhance the education capability of an individual using these neural network models. In the chemistry and in the modeling of empirical processes or to generate empirical solutions of a lot of chemical processes which can be converged or identified through the data which is generated through the chemical process, and we can use the neural network models to predict the outcome of a chemical process, or we can also classify, or we can also understand a chemical process through a neural network modeling of the data which we do in the various steps of this chemical process. And more towards the applications in the domain of computer science or business applications, we know the signal processing, pattern recognition in terms of handwriting, characters and face identifications, and diagnosis for the medical case, speech recognition, where we can identify, which is a very good application, where we can actually identify whether the particular speech is for user A or user B, and based on this we develop a lot of security systems. We can also classify human emotions, and hence we can detect human emotion through the neural network models, because a neural network is a good classifier, so we can use it for human emotion detection. Similarly, as neural network can be used for prediction, we can use the different types of educational loan forecasting based on the different parameters of the particular individual. So this is a simple case study what I wish to show you all. So this is a neural network model where we have the inputs on the top and the output or the classification results at the bottom. Though it seems to be a single layer neural network, but you don't, but just to make the example simple, I have done it. But obviously this can be a multi-layer model also. So this demonstrates that suppose we have an abdominal pain prediction, and we have different classes of abdominal pain. That is, what are the different reasons for which the abdominal pain occurs, and at the top we have the data what we collect from the individual, like the gender, the age, the temperature, the WBC count, the intensity of the pain and duration of the pain, and based on that, through our neural network, we can decide that whether this pain is a particular class like appendicitis or ulcer or cholestasis, or it is not among any other classes. So this gives a good example that how we can actually use the neural network best to classify a particular record or particular information based on the different data parameters available. So now what are the advantages we have? Obviously, nonlinearity gives us a sort of way to handle the complex things. The complex models, that means it is a very simple way to map an input and output mapping and to form a relationship. It is adaptive because you can adjust the weights, you can train the network according to your data available. So the same network model can be trained for different problems, and hence it is adaptive. It is very responsive because it can provide a very confidence to a solution in the way it means that it is very decisive. That means it actually predicts based on some specific values of the data, and their computation based on a specific logic or a function which evaluates the particular data, and hence we can have a good confidence on the solution. Obviously, we can have a lot of activities in the network, and we can establish a lot of relationships in this particular using this neural network, and that's why it is a very contextual information can be well understood based on the neural network model, because contextual information means we need to have a lot of interactions or a lot of convergence between the different parameters of the information, which can be well handled by neural network. Fault tolerance is another aspect of neural network, because neural networks can actually identify, as it is a network of nodes. We can very easily identify through our error analysis that in which particular layer or in which particular node our neural network model has gone wrong, and we can actually take corrective measures. And obviously it opens a new particular domain like neurobiology, and which actually can, so neural network can adopt a lot of the things from the neuro study of our brain, and we can push those things in our neural network architecture, because as we know that our brain is really a very intelligent processing engine. So more and more we discover this neurobiology, and more we can incorporate those neuro models into our artificial networks and neural networks, and we can make our networks stronger and efficient. So at last, I try to just compare what are the salient features by which the artificial neural networks are distinct from the traditional computing. Okay, so we know the neural networks are that means can be easily thought about parallel computation very easily, because we have the weights which are coming to the individual nodes, and each of the computation at the nodes can be done in a concurrent way or in a parallel way, which actually tells the neural networks very essentially can be mapped into the parallel execution model. We don't have to take an extra thought to map these neural networks to a parallel model, and that gives us a good enhancement in the throughput or processing of the data based on neural network compared to the other models. Similarly, in the case of the functionalities, what we can have or the ways we can visualize the activity or the functionality of the artificial neural network, we can tell that it is more based on the data, okay, not based on the rules or concepts. So it is more adaptive in that sense, and like the Gestalt or the right brain function, which takes the information in forms of images, pictures, and some operational strategies, and we can actually make the functions as a sort of data dependent or based on the inherent information in the data, and that guides us for our processing. Learning method is very well adapted or well implemented in artificial neural network compared to the other traditional computing, because it takes the insight from the data which is available, not by some existing rules, which means that this particular model is more adaptive in terms of learning and accurate over a wide variety of data, which might not be true for the case of traditional computing. As we already know, in the case of applications, we have a lot of this pattern matching, pattern recognitions applications are well mapped into the artificial neural network domain, and that actually gives a lot of mileage of artificial neural network in the modern applications what we have. So I conclude this course with some of the summary what I have discussed today. So today we learned about the fundamentals of artificial neural networks, what are the building blocks of the artificial neural networks based on the assumptions of the existing biological neurons, and how we have adapted the biological neurons to our computation model for ANN. We have also learned the way we can think of the activation functions for building up this artificial neural network. What are the possible ways we can create these functions? We have also gone through a case study, example case study for this for understanding the way the ANN works with the input data and its weight, and can classify a particular data. We have also learned some of the ways these networks can be trained, and like supervised, unsupervised models, how this network can be trained. And lastly, we concluded with some of the applications which are very commonly considered in artificial neural network applications, and also some of the comparative features of artificial neural networks with the existing machine learning algorithms.